some franchises have sadly had the misfortune of bombing spectacularly both times. Although wider cinema has already been covered in this 10 movie franchises which got terribly adapted twice video right here, now is the time to hone in and explore the domain of horror, folks. So buckle up, it's gonna be a bumpy ride. Because I am Gareth, this is What Culture Horror, and here are 10 horror movie franchises which got terribly adapted twice. Number 10, Firestarter. Even though adapting a book is a big gamble, Stephen King's earliest work was met with overwhelming positivity when it transitioned to the big screen. Unfortunately, that winning streak ended in 1984, when we received two botched King adaptations in a row, Firestarter and Children of the Corn, more on that later. Though Drew Barrymore's charismatic performance stops Firestarter from being a complete disaster, the film should have been far more gripping considering it revolves around a flame-summoning child, Charlie McGee. Having said that, the 1984 version didn't crash and burn as badly as the 2022 remake, as the relationship between the young pyrokinetic and her father in this version isn't developed enough for viewers to care about them. If the audience doesn't give a damn about the lead characters, that's a really bad sign, isn't it? Though the girl's ability should be awe-inspiring, her displays of power in the remake come across as bland and tepid. Although the idea of a youngster burning everything around her to a crisp is terrifying, there's never any sense of urgency due to the poor performances and sloppy cinematography. The original might not have been great, but 2022's Firestarter is among the worst King adaptations ever. But I've got a quick question for you. What is your favourite Stephen King adaptation though? You let me know in the comment section down below. Number 9, Piranha. Although Joe Dante's Piranha had the potential to be genuinely frightful, the kitschy flick suffered one glaring problem. The titular beasts make a whirling noise every time they appear, which sounds a bit weird. So as scary as the piranhas look, it's impossible to take them seriously since they sound like a broken washing machine. Rather than try something different with the 1995 made-for-TV movie, this Piranha remake recycled everything from the original. And that is not an exaggeration, as this version literally recycled shots of the nasty little fishes from the first movie and used an almost identical script. Even though expectations were at an all-time low, 2010's Piranha 3D actually looked promising. Not only was this reimagining leaning more into comedy, it was directed by Alexander Aja, who has an excellent track record in horror. Despite boasting a heap of hilarious kills, most of Piranha 3D sequences are let down by awful visuals though. No, not awful, unfinished. For example, the piranhas featured in the film's first attack are so poorly rendered, it looks like test footage. After the Piranha 3 Double D sequel failed to make a splash, plans to continue the franchise were wisely scrapped. Number 8, Children of the Corn. Told you we'd get there. How do you screw up a Stephen King adaptation about a cult of killer kids? Save for John Franklin's sinister performance as Isaac, the original Children of the Corn hasn't much to offer. Nevertheless, this dud somehow generated 8 equally shabby sequels. Believing the first film was too Hollywoodized, original producer Donald P. Borchers decided a reimagining was warranted. In the 2009 version's defense, it's much closer to the unused screenplay for the 1984 film, written by King himself. Unfortunately, there's nothing else nice to really say about it. The characters are unlikable, the scenes are bereft of tension, and the jump scares can be seen coming a mile away. And due to the awkward line delivery and cheap sets, this remake feels more like a children's play. Although nobody was clamoring for more, another Children of the Corn adaptation was unleashed on the world in 2023. Though this reboot tries to tell a new story and explore modern socio-political themes, it still comes across as a lazy rehash. Considering Children of the Corn hasn't been adapted properly despite 11 installments and 2 reboots, it might be time for movie studios to give up on this cursed story. Number 7, Prom Night. In Prom Night, Kimberly and her 3 friends try to move on with their lives after accidentally causing the death of a 10-year-old girl. 6 years after the incident, the 4 high schoolers discover they're being stalked by a masked maniac. Even though Prom Night is painfully derivative, it could have redeemed itself if it had a few creatively gory kills. Sadly, the bloodshed is almost non-existent, and although subtle violence can be effective, it's not really the case here, since the camera cuts away anytime things are about to get juicy. And despite Prom Night managing to produce 3 sequels, none of them brought anything new to the table. Yet all of those sequels feel like masterpieces compared to the remake. The characters in 2008's Prom Night wander off alone in the darkness so often, it's like they're asking to be killed. The executions are also disappointingly bloodless yet again, almost as if the studio was pushing for a G rating. Making things worse, there's no twist this time out, since the killer's identity is revealed immediately. So rather than being a whodunit, this version of Prom Night feels more like a why are we still watching this? Number 6. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Adapted from Jack Finney's novel, 1956's Invasion of the Body Snatchers revolves around a group of aliens who've assimilated into human society, hoping to conquer the world. Many viewers gravitated towards the sci-fi flick's themes of conformity, individualism, and McCarthyism, since communism was a serious problem at the time. Invasion of the Body Snatchers' popularity inspired a 1978 remake, which is arguably better than the original. Sadly, the same cannot be said about the other 2 versions. Though 1993's Body Snatchers is competent at best, it doesn't do or say anything the previous installments haven't already covered. Then there's the 3rd remake, The Invasion, which is such a forgettable bore, most movie advocates didn't even notice it when it came out. In fact, some people are likely only finding out about it right now. Also, the irony of watching Daniel Craig's character struggling to stay awake shouldn't be lost on the semi-conscious audience. Now it's easy to understand why studios are compelled to redo this classic story, since it has a permanent relevancy in society. However, anyone who's watched the earlier installments have no reason to endure the later ones. Number 5. Carrie. Brian De Palma's Carrie has had such a lasting cultural impact, it's surprising it took until 2002 before the property got the remake treatment. The made-for-TV movie doesn't come close to matching the original, but it's not without merit. Angela Bettis is remarkable as Carrie White, conveying a diverse range of emotions through her eyes and body language. And the story structure is significantly different, so it doesn't really feel like a carbon copy of the 1976 classic. Unfortunately, the ending takes a massive divergence from the source material, solely to continue the story as a TV series that never materialized. This climax feels so forced and tacked on, it ruins an otherwise okay movie. In 2013, another Carrie remake was released, with Chloe Grace Moretz portraying the titular role. Despite her best efforts, the kick-ass star is too miscast to portray a social pariah convincingly. Not only that, the brutality which Carrie White suffers is glossed over in this version, making the revenge-fueled climax far less satisfying. Speaking of which, the iconic finale is overly stylized, almost as if director Kimberly Peirce forgot she was making a horror film, not a blockbuster. Number 4. Doom. On the surface, 2005's Doom seemed like it could be the first decent film adapted from a video game. It had a solid cast, Clint Mansell composed the soundtrack, and it contained an incredible first-person action sequence that recreated the look of the iconic gaming shooter. Unfortunately, there was one colossal problem. Rather than fighting monsters from hell like the source material, the film adaptation has our hero pitted against infected humans. Sure, Doom has its fair share of problems, but nothing was as unforgivable as this pointless retcon in the eyes of die-hard fans. Although critics tore Doom apart, nobody hated it more than gamers. Luckily, the 2019 reboot felt like a step in the right direction, since it implemented major elements from the game's storyline. Most importantly, the villains were actually demons this time around. What could go wrong? Well, everything. Doom Annihilation turned out so badly, it'll compel viewers to defend its predecessor. Due to the ropey dialogue, bad acting, and plastic sets, Annihilation feels like a failed TV pilot, and it never comes across as scary, primarily because the CGI demons resemble something from a PlayStation 2 game. Number 3. Puppet Master. When it comes to killer doll movies, Chucky is the undisputed king. Although Puppet Master is far lower on the totem pole, the Nazi doll saga has still managed to significantly expand its brand, to the point that Puppet Master has released 11 official installments, 2 spin-offs, a crossover, a multiplayer video game, and multiple comics. What makes this feat more impressive is the fact that every Puppet Master movie is dreadful, even by campy horror standards. This shouldn't be much of a surprise considering many entries were written, directed, or produced by Charles Band, who's infamous for churning out schlock like The Ginger Dead Man and 9 Evil Bong movies. This is cinema. Though the original has its charm, it's hindered by cheap effects, slow pacing, and a first draft script. So when a reboot was announced for 2018, horror fans were hoping to get a half-decent Puppet Master for once. Though Puppet Master The Littlest Reich is probably the best of the bunch, that is not saying much. This installment has some punchy dialogue and a few slick kills, but there isn't anything here we haven't seen before, including a lousy story and cardboard cutout characters. Number 2, Resident Evil. Paul W.S. Anderson's Resident Evil franchise earned over $1 billion, making it the most lucrative video game series adaptation until the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Even though the zombie series raked in a fortune, it doesn't change the fact every installment is mind-numbingly bad. Not only do these films eviscerate the original Resident Evil story, they feel more like blockbusters than horror pictures. For this reason, the gaming community breathed a collective sigh of relief when the 2021 reboot was announced. Based on the promotions, Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City seemingly captured the spirit of the source material, nailing the look and atmosphere of the first 2 games. Against all odds, this version turned out worse than Paul W.S. Anderson's efforts. How is that possible? Popular figures like Wesker and Leon were butchered so badly, it seemed like director Johan Robert had never played the game. Subplots were stuffed in for the sake of eye-rolling fanservice, turning the narrative into an incomprehensible mess. Iconic villains like Lisa Trevor and William Birkin came across as generic monsters. And worst of all, the film just was not scary. Although a sequel is still possible, it's probably in everyone's best interest if this property, much like the zombies, stays dead. Number 1, Maximum Overdrive. After Stephen King saw how poorly his work was being adapted, he decided to take matters into his own hands. And so, in 1986, the visionary author directed Maximum Overdrive, based on his own short story, Trucks. The film opens with space radiation blanketing the Earth, causing machines everywhere to develop murderous tendencies. It may be a nutty idea, but Stephen King just might be the only person who can pull it off. Ironically, the King of Horror's directorial debut ended up as an unintentional comedy, thanks to the ridiculous tonal shifts, awful dialogue, and preposterous line deliveries. But after watching the 1997 TV movie Trucks, viewers might think they were too harsh on the first adaptation. As while Maximum Overdrive may be terrible, it's at least entertaining, although for all the wrong reasons. Trucks, on the other hand, is boring, unimaginative, and nonsensical. For example, why would anyone try to escape on a motorcycle or a helicopter when the vehicles are coming to life? And though there's a decent amount of gore, the blood looks like raspberry jam, especially during the scene where the mailman is murdered by a Tonka truck. Even though the cast do their best with the material, there's no possible way to salvage this particular car crash. But well, they give it a go.